I'm going to tell you a story that most of the Galactic Council has tried very hard to bury. They scrubbed the footage, reclassified the after-action reports, even had the Velori ambassador issue a formal request to have all surviving helmet cam recordings destroyed under Article 19 of the Interspecies Dignity Accord. Didn't work, of course. Somebody always talks, somebody always keeps a copy. And I was there, standing 60 meters behind the barricade when it happened. So no amount of diplomatic pressure is going to make me forget what I saw Sergeant Marin Calloway do on the frozen ridgeline of Korvath 7. Not a chance. Let me back up. Korvath 7 is, or was, a mining colony on the outer spiral of the Drenak Reach, cold world. The kind of place where the sun barely clears the horizon before it gives up and sinks back down again. Perpetual twilight, iron-gray skies, wind that cuts through thermal layers like they're made of wet paper. Nobody lives on Korvath 7 because they want to. You live there because you owe somebody money, or because you're running from somebody, or because you signed a 3-year mineral extraction contract with Voss Kellerman Industries and didn't read the fine print about remote assignment eligibility. The colony had maybe 4,000 souls at its peak. Humans, mostly, a few Drenaki laborers, a handful of Selkari engineers who kept the atmospheric processors humming, everybody bundled in thermoweave jackets, everybody miserable. Everybody counting down the days until their rotation ended, and they could get on a shuttle back to somewhere warm. I was stationed there as a logistics coordinator for the United Earth Frontier Corps. Fancy title. What it actually meant was I managed supply drops and argued with bureaucrats on Centauri Station about why we needed more heating coils. Not exactly glory work, but it kept me fed and the pay was decent, and I figured 3 years, bank the credits, get out clean. That was the plan anyway, before the Velori showed up. The Velori are one of those species that the Galactic Council likes to hold up as an example of advanced civilization. And look, I'll give them credit where it's due. Their technology is impressive. Their ships are beautiful, all swept lines and iridescent hull plating that shimmers like oil on water. Their cities, from what I've seen in hollows, are these sprawling crystalline-light affairs that make anything humans have built look like mud huts by comparison. But here's the thing nobody on the council likes to talk about. The Velori are bullies. Not the loud, obvious kind. They're too sophisticated for that. They're the kind of bullies who smile at you while they squeeze, who use words like protection arrangement and resource optimization partnership when what they really mean is give us what we want or we'll take it. They'd been expanding their influence across the Drenak Reach for years, absorbing smaller colonies, signing mutual defense treaties, with mining operations that somehow always ended with Velori overseers running the show and Velori corporations shipping the profits off-world. Korvath 7 had been in their sights for a while. The lithium-9 deposits in the northern basin were some of the richest in the sector, and the Velori wanted them. They'd made offers. The colony administration had turned them down politely at first, then less politely when the offers started coming with thinly veiled threats. Earth's colonial charter was clear. Korvath 7 was a sovereign human settlement, and its resources belonged to the people who worked them. The Velori didn't care about Earth's colonial charter. They came on a Tuesday. I remember that because I'd just finished filing a requisition for replacement water filters, and I was thinking about how Tuesdays on Korvath 7 were somehow even more depressing than Mondays, which shouldn't have been possible. 3 ships, Velori cruiser class. They dropped out of fold space about 40,000 kilometers above the colony and just sat there, hanging in orbit like vultures waiting for something to die. The colony administrator, a tired, decent man named Hendrik Pulse, tried hailing them. Standard protocols. Identify yourselves, state your intentions, you are entering sovereign airspace. The response came back 6 hours later. A recorded message, very formal, very polite, very Velori. The Velori Dominion, in accordance with Galactic Resource Allocation, Statute 773, hereby asserts prior geological claim to the lithium-9 deposits of Korvath 7. All extraction operations will be transferred to Velori oversight within 48 standard hours. Cooperation will be noted and rewarded. Resistance is unnecessary and inadvisable. Hendrik played the message for the Colony Council. Then he played it again. Then he sat down heavily in his chair and said a word I won't repeat here. 48 hours, that's what they gave us. Now Corvath 7 had a garrison. United Earth Frontier Corps 3rd Expeditionary Platoon. 32 soldiers, that's it. 32 men and women whose primary job was supposed to be wildlife management and occasional dispute resolution among drunk miners. They were not, by any stretch of the imagination, equipped to fight a Velori invasion force. But they were there, and when Hendrik sent the distress call to Centauri Station, which would take at least 6 days to respond even if they scrambled a relief force immediately, those 32 soldiers were all that stood between 4,000 colonists and whatever the Velori had planned. The platoon commander was a man named Lieutenant Darren Voss. Good officer, steady, not flashy, the kind of guy who ran logistics drills on schedule and made sure everybody's gear was maintained and didn't make speeches. He gathered the platoon in the colony's main hangar, the big one they used for equipment storage, with the corrugated alloy ceiling that pinged when the wind hit it right, and laid out the situation. Velori ground forces will deploy within 20 to 30 hours, he said. Based on the ship configuration, we're looking at somewhere between 200 and 300 Velori regulars, possibly armored support. Our job is to hold the colony until relief arrives from Centauri. Nobody said anything for a long moment. 32 against 300. The math wasn't complicated. Then a voice from the back row said, "What about their armor?" That was Corporal Tomas Rieker, young kid, smart. He'd done a semester at the Martian Defense Academy before transferring to frontier service, and he'd studied Velori military doctrine. Voss looked at him. "What about it?" "Velori infantry use Nexar-class personal armor," Rieker said. "It's layered kinetic shielding over a crystalline composite shell. Standard ballistic rounds won't penetrate. Neither will most directed energy weapons below Class 4. Our rifles are Class 2. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. The first silence had been worry. This one was something closer to dread. Voss, to his credit, didn't flinch. "We'll work with what we have. Defensive positions, choke points, environmental advantages. This planet is hostile, and we know it better than they do." But I could see it in his face. That flicker behind the comm. He knew the numbers. He knew the technology gap. And he was already making peace with the idea that holding the colony might not be possible. That's when I first noticed Sergeant Marin Calloway. She was sitting on an ammo crate near the side wall, slightly apart from the rest of the platoon. Not dramatically apart, she wasn't making a statement about it. She just naturally occupied her own space, like a cat that chooses its own spot and doesn't care if the couch is 3 feet to the left. Calloway was let me think about how to describe her. 34, maybe 35, average height. Brown hair cut short enough to stay out of her face but long enough that it still moved when she turned her head. A face that wasn't pretty in any conventional way but had a quality to it, something sharp and focused. Like a blade that had been honed so many times the edge was invisible until it cut you. She'd been on Corvath 7 for about 8 months, transferred in from some frontier posting I couldn't remember the name of. Quiet, professional, not unfriendly, but not someone who showed up at the rec hall for movie night either. The thing I noticed about her, the thing that stuck with me, was that while everyone else in that hangar was processing fear or anger or disbelief, Calloway looked thoughtful, not scared, not even particularly concerned, just thoughtful, like someone working through a problem. She didn't say anything during the briefing, didn't ask questions. Just sat on that ammo crate with her arms crossed and her head slightly tilted, watching Voss talk, occasionally glancing toward the hangar's reinforced windows where you could see the gray sky and the distant ridgeline. When the briefing ended and people started breaking into groups, arguing, planning, panicking in various controlled ways, Calloway stood up, stretched like she'd been sitting through a mildly boring meeting, and walked out. I didn't think much of it at the time. I had my own problems, supply logistics for a siege scenario, water rationing calculations, 1,000 small emergencies that needed to become slightly smaller. But I should have paid more attention to where she went. The Velori landed 26 hours later. 3 dropships. Heavy ones with that distinctive Velori shimmer plating that made them look like they were sweating mercury. They came down in the flat basin north of the colony, a stretch of frozen gravel and stunted rock formations that the miners called the deadpan because nothing grew there. Not even lichen. 240 Valori regulars, as it turned out, plus a dozen armored transport crawlers and a command vehicle that looked like someone had taken a small building, covered it in chrome, and taught it to hover. They established a perimeter with almost lazy efficiency. No rush, no urgency, they knew the math too. The Valori field commander sent a delegation. 3 officers in dress armor, the fancy kind, with the golden filigree on the shoulder plates that indicated noble bloodline. They walked across the deadpan, toward the colony gate like they were attending a garden party. Hendrik met them at the gate with Voss and a 4-person security detail. I was nearby, close enough to hear, far enough to feel like I wasn't quite involved. The lead Valori officer was tall, even by their standards. 7 feet, maybe a little more. Slim in that way all Valori are slim, like evolution had decided that anything wider than a willow branch was wasteful. Pale skin with that faint blue undertone. Eyes the color of winter sky. Beautiful if you like your beauty cold and slightly terrifying. His name, I learned later, was Commander Rael Thassin, 9th Vanguard Expeditionary Division, a name that carried weight in Valori military circles, apparently. He looked at Hendrik. He looked at Voss. He looked at the colony gate, which was industrial-grade alloy but wouldn't stop a Valori breaching charge for more than about 30 seconds. And he smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, exactly. It was worse than that. It was the smile of someone who genuinely couldn't imagine a scenario in which they didn't get exactly what they wanted. "Administrator Pulse," he said. His standard was perfect. Valori always spoke perfect standard, with that lilting accent that made everything sound like poetry. "This is unnecessary, surely you see that." Hendrik, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 26 hours, straightened his back. "Commander, this colony is a sovereign Earth settlement. Your presence here is a violation of the Colonial Autonomy Accords." "Accords drafted by your species," Thassin said. "Not ratified by the Dominion, and therefore, with respect, not our concern. The Galactic Council will issue a statement, perhaps 2 statements. There will be a committee, a subcommittee. Eventually, in 6 or 8 months, they will draft a resolution expressing mild displeasure, by which time the lithium-9 will be flowing through Valori processing facilities, and the matter will be, as your people say, academic." He wasn't wrong, and everybody standing at that gate knew it. Voss stepped forward. "We have 32 armed personnel and orders to defend this colony." Thassin looked at him for a moment, and something in the Valori commander's expression shifted. Not to contempt, exactly. More like curiosity. The way you might look at a small insect that had positioned itself on your dinner plate and appeared to have no intention of moving. "Lieutenant," Thassin said, and his voice was almost gentle, "I have 240 soldiers in Nexar-class armor. Your rifles won't pierce it. Your grenades won't scratch it. You have no artillery, no armor support, and no reinforcements within effective range." He paused. "I have no wish to harm anyone. Stand down. Let us do what we came to do. Your people can continue to live here, to work here. They'll simply work under different management." Voss didn't respond right away. I could see the tendons in his jaw working. "No," he said finally. Thassin sighed. It was a very elegant sigh. "You have until dawn." That night was the longest night I'd ever spent on Corvath 7, and I'd spent a lot of long nights on that frozen rock. Voss set up defensive positions along the colony's perimeter, barricades at the 3 main access points, firing positions on the processing plant rooftops, communication relays hardened against electronic warfare. It wasn't enough, and everyone knew it wasn't enough. The colony's defenses were designed to keep out wildlife, the big armored burrowers that occasionally surfaced near the hab blocks, not a professional military force. The colonists were scared. Some of them wanted to surrender. A few of them said so loudly in the mess hall where voices carried and opinions spread. Hendrik held a town meeting and did his best to project calm authority, but you could see the cracks. You could see the question behind his eyes. Am I going to get these people killed over mineral rights? I was in the supply depot, running inventory when Calloway walked in. She moved through the shelves like she knew exactly what she was looking for, which apparently she did, because she went straight to the far corner where we stored the specialty ammunition, the stuff that never got used, the legacy stock that had been on Corvath 7 since before I arrived. "Sergeant," I said. She glanced at me. "Evening, Renner." Can I help you with something? Maybe. She crouched beside a crate I'd never opened, brushed the frost off the label, read it, moved to the next one. You inventory all this when you came on. Most of it, the back section hasn't been touched in years. It's all pre-certified, sealed stock. Nothing we'd use for standard patrols. Right, she found whatever she was looking for and pried the crate open with a multi-tool. Inside, nestled in foam packing, were rows of cartridges I didn't recognize, longer than standard, heavier. The casings had a dark, almost coppery sheen. What are those? I asked. She picked one up and held it to the light. There was something almost reverent in the way she turned it. Tungsten carbide core, depleted uranium jacket. Hardened tip with a ceramic penetrator insert. She looked at me. These are P-71 Pierce-Point rounds. Earth Orbital Command developed them about 12 years ago. For what? For exactly this. She set the round down carefully. For Nexar armor. I stared at her. Those are anti-armor rounds for a rifle. For a specific rifle. Long barrel, high velocity, bolt action. Something with enough muzzle energy to push these through a kinetic shield at range. She was already counting the cartridges in the crate. There should be, 120 rounds, 6 crates of 20. How did you know these were here? She gave me a look, just a look. But something in it told me the answer was complicated and she didn't feel like explaining. Does Lieutenant Voss know about these? I asked. He will. She picked up the crate and walked out. I stood there for a minute, staring at the empty slot on the shelf where the crate had been, and tried to figure out why the back of my neck was tingling. I found out later, much later, what Calloway had been doing in the 26 hours between the briefing and the Vellore landing. She'd been in the machine shop. Corvath 7's machine shop was a big, cluttered space attached to the mining operations maintenance bay. The miners used it for fabricating replacement parts, drill heads, conveyor brackets, that sort of thing. It had a precision lathe, a molecular forge, 2 3D printers, and more hand tools than a museum. Calloway had walked in 26 hours ago, commandeered a workbench, and told the mining foreman, a grizzled woman named DaCosta who didn't take orders from soldiers, that she needed the lathe, the forge, and 16 uninterrupted hours. DaCosta had apparently looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Don't break my lathe." What Calloway built over those 16 hours was a rifle. Not from scratch. She'd started with a Kessler K-14, standard frontier issue, semi-automatic, perfectly adequate for killing 6-legged predators and absolutely useless against Vellore armor. She'd stripped it down to the receiver. Replaced the barrel with a custom-machined, extended-length tube, 32 inches, heavy profile, with a 1 in 8 twist rate that she'd calculated by hand on a piece of scrap paper. She'd reinforced the bolt assembly, reconfigured the gas system into a straight-pull bolt action to handle the increased chamber pressure, modified the stock with a custom cheek riser and a recoil absorption system she'd built from mining equipment shock dampeners. The finished weapon was ugly. There's no other word for it. It was a Frankenstein gun, all harsh angles and welded joints and mismatched metals. It looked like something a desperate person would build in a garage. But when Calloway took it to the colony's makeshift range and fired the first P-71 round through it, the muzzle velocity readings came back at 4,600 feet per second. For context, a standard K-14 fires at about 2,800. Calloway looked at the readings, made a small adjustment to the trigger pull weight, and fired again. 4,620. She nodded to herself, just a small nod, and then she started making more rifles. She came to Voss at 0300, 5 hours before the Vellore deadline. I know this because I was in the command post helping coordinate water distribution, and Calloway walked in with a data pad and that look on her face, that thoughtful, blade-sharp look. "Lieutenant," she said, "I need to show you something." Voss was exhausted, running on stimulants and willpower, but he looked at her and something in his expression changed. Maybe he recognized something in her eyes, I don't know. "Go ahead, Sergeant." Calloway set the data pad on the table. Vellore Nexar armor operates on a layered defense system. The outer layer is a kinetic energy shield. It redistributes incoming force across the entire surface area of the armor. That's why standard ballistic rounds bounce off. They don't have enough localized energy to overwhelm the redistribution matrix. She pulled up a diagram. I couldn't follow all of it, but Voss leaned forward. The shield has a refresh rate, she continued. After it absorbs an impact, it takes 0.3 seconds to recalibrate. During that window, the shield's effectiveness drops by approximately 60% at the point of impact. A second round, delivered to the same location within that window, faces significantly less resistance. Double tap, Voss said quietly. In theory, but the second round still has to penetrate the crystalline composite shell underneath. Standard ammunition can't do that even without the shield. She paused. P-71 Pierce-Point rounds can. Voss looked at her. Where did you get P-71 rounds? Supply depot, back shelf. Been here since the colony was founded, from the look of it. Probably part of the original emergency defense package that nobody bothered to catalog properly. And a weapon that can fire them. I built 4. I can build more before dawn if DaCosta lets me keep using her lathe. The silence in the command post was different from the silences I'd heard before. This one had something alive in it, something that hadn't been there an hour ago. Hope, small and fragile and probably stupid, but there. Voss studied the data pad. I watched his eyes move across the schematics, the ballistic calculations, the shield refresh analysis. He was a logistics officer at heart. Numbers were his language. You're talking about precision shooting, he said finally. 2 rounds, same location, within a third of a second. At what range? Effective range for the modified K-14 platform is about 800 meters. Optimal is 400 to 600. In this wind, I've run the calculations. We can compensate. And how many of these rifles do you have? 4 completed, I can have 8 by dawn. How many people in this platoon can shoot at the level you're describing? Calloway didn't hesitate. 3, maybe 4 with some quick coaching. Voss sat back. So we're talking about 4 rifles, 4 shooters against 240 armored infantry. Not exactly. Calloway pulled up another screen. I'm not suggesting we fight their army. I'm suggesting we fight their confidence. The plan Calloway laid out was either brilliant or insane, and I'm still not sure which. Maybe both. The Velori, she explained, had a very specific military doctrine. It was built around a fundamental assumption. Their armor made them invulnerable to small arms fire. Everything flowed from that assumption. Their tactics, their formations, their psychology. They advanced in the open because they didn't need cover. They moved in tight groups because dispersal was unnecessary. They didn't respect defensive positions because defensive positions couldn't hurt them. Their confidence is their doctrine, Calloway said. And their doctrine is their weakness. When you've never been hurt, you don't know how to react to pain. The first time one of them goes down, actually goes down, from a weapon they were told couldn't touch them, it won't just be one casualty. It'll be a crack in their entire operational framework. You want to make them scared, Voss said. I want to make them uncertain. There's a difference. Scared people do unpredictable things. Uncertain people hesitate. And in a military engagement, hesitation is time, and time is what we need. Until Centauri responds. Until Centauri responds. Voss was quiet for a long time. Through the command post window, I could see the faint glow of the Velori camp on the deadpan. 240 soldiers in shining armor, waiting for dawn. Build the rifles, Voss said. Calloway worked through the night. DaCosta, who had apparently decided that Calloway was either crazy or the most interesting person she'd met in 4 years on Corvath 7, possibly both, helped her. They turned out 4 more modified K-14s by 0500, with an hour to spare before the deadline. 8 rifles, 120 rounds. 480 potential shots if they went with the double-tap method, but realistically far fewer, because you don't fire every round perfectly, and you don't hit every shot, and war doesn't cooperate with math. Calloway selected her shooters. Herself, obviously, Corporal Reicher, who had the highest marksmanship scores in the platoon. Private First Class Una Song, a quiet woman from the lunar colonies who barely spoke during patrols but shot like the rifle was an extension of her nervous system. And Sergeant Brendan Hale, a freckled, steady-handed veteran who'd been in frontier service for 12 years and could outshoot most people while half asleep. The 4 of them spent the remaining hour on the range. Not practicing shots, they didn't have rounds to waste. Practicing the rhythm, .3 seconds between trigger pulls, first round to break the shield, second round to penetrate. Calloway had them drilling dry, over and over, until the timing was muscle memory. I watched from the doorway of the supply depot. There was something mesmerizing about it. The four of them standing in a row, working their bolts in unison. The click-rack-click of the actions, over and over, like a heartbeat. Dawn on Corvette 7 isn't like dawn anywhere else I've been. There's no sunrise. The sky just goes from black to dark gray to slightly less dark gray. The light doesn't break, it seeps. Like the planet is reluctantly admitting that another day has begun and it's not happy about it. By 0600, the Velori were moving. I could see them from the command post window. 240 soldiers forming up in the deadpan, arranged in their standard assault formation, 3 waves, 80 soldiers each, with the armored crawlers positioned behind the second wave. They moved with that fluid, synchronized grace that Velori soldiers are known for. Every step perfectly timed. Every turn precisely coordinated. Like watching a dance rehearsal for the most lethal ballet company in the galaxy. Commander Thassen's voice came over the colony's external communication array. Clear, calm, polite. Administrator Pulse, the deadline has passed. We are advancing. I urge you one final time to stand down. No one needs to be harmed today. Hendrik, standing at the comm panel with sweat on his forehead, despite the cold, looked at Voss. Voss looked at Calloway. Calloway was already moving. She had her modified K-14 slung across her back. The first one she'd built, the ugly one, the one she'd zeroed personally. And she was heading for the north barricade with her 3 shooters behind her. Voss picked up the comm. Negative, Commander, this colony is defended. A pause, then Thassen with what might have been genuine regret. Very well. The Velori advance began. I want to be honest about what came next, because I think it's important. The first 10 minutes were terrible. The Velori moved across the deadpan in their standard assault formation, and our soldiers opened fire from the barricade, and the rounds bounced off the Nexar armor like rain off a windshield. Literally bounced. You could see the sparks, tiny flashes of kinetic energy dissipating against the shimmering surface of the shields. The Velori didn't even slow down. I watched Private Marco Chen empty an entire magazine into the lead wave. 30 rounds, controlled bursts just like training, every round hit. And the Velori soldier he was shooting at didn't break stride, didn't flinch, just kept walking forward with that smooth, terrifying grace. Chen lowered his rifle and stared at it. I could see the expression on his face from 60 meters away. It was the look of a man who had just realized that the tool he'd been trained to trust, the tool that represented his ability to fight, to survive, to matter, was useless. That look spread. Across the barricade, soldier after soldier arrived at the same conclusion. They kept firing because training runs deep and stopping feels like dying, but the shots had a mechanical quality now, going through the motions, the sound of a defense that knew it wasn't defending anything. The Velori were 600 meters out, then 500, then 400. At 350 meters, I saw Commander Thassen walking behind the first wave. Not hiding, not even slightly concealed. Walking upright, hands clasped behind his back like a man strolling through a park. His armor caught the dim light and gleamed softly. He knew, they all knew, this wasn't a battle, it was a procession. And that's when Calloway fired. The sound was different. Every other shot that morning had sounded the same, the sharp, flat crack of standard K-14 rifles, a sound the colony had heard 1,000 times during target practice and wildlife control. Familiar. Almost domestic. This sound was deeper, heavier. It had weight to it, a chest-punch quality that rolled across the deadpan and echoed off the ridgeline like distant thunder. Not louder exactly, just more presence, more intent. I didn't see the impact, not the first one. I was looking in the wrong direction, watching the command post monitors, watching the Velori formation, watching Hendrik's hands shake. I heard it, though, a sound like cracking ice. A sharp, crystalline snap that carried across the frozen air with startling clarity. And then I heard something I'd never heard before in any engagement with the Velori. A scream. The Velori soldier went down in the first wave. Third from the left, about 400 meters from the barricade. One moment walking forward. The next, stumbling sideways, clutching his midsection, his armor's kinetic shield sputtering and flickering like a broken hologram. The formation kept moving, for about 2 seconds. Then the soldiers on either side of the fallen one noticed. Then the soldiers behind them noticed. Then word rippled backward through the wave in that rapid, fluid way that information moves through a Velori unit, not shouted orders, but a shift in body language, a hesitation in the synchronized step. The formation stuttered. 240 soldiers advancing in perfect unison, and for just a moment the rhythm broke. Just a heartbeat's worth of disruption, a tiny crack in the choreography. But I noticed it, Voss noticed it, and Calloway noticed it. She fired again. Same sound, that deep rolling crack. And this time I was watching, so I saw it, the round hitting a second Velori soldier in the upper chest. The kinetic shield flaring bright blue for a fraction of a second before the second round punched through it, and the soldier jerked backward like he'd been shoved by an invisible hand and went down. 2 Velori on the ground in 10 seconds. The formation didn't just stutter this time, it stopped. I have replayed what happened next in my mind hundreds of times, and I still find it remarkable. The Velori stopped, all of them. 240 soldiers frozen in place on the deadpan like someone had hit a pause button. And in that frozen moment you could feel something changing, not just in the battle, in the air, in the understanding of what was possible. Commander Thassin pushed forward through the ranks. I could see him through the command post's long-range optics, his face tight, his head turning left and right, scanning the barricade, trying to understand what had just happened, what weapon had done this. He found the fallen soldiers, crouched beside one, examined the armor. I don't know what he saw exactly, but I know what the after-action report said, the one the Velori tried to classify. The first round had overloaded the kinetic shield at the point of impact. The second round, arriving 0.27 seconds later, had punched through the weakened shield and penetrated the crystalline composite shell beneath, delivering a tungsten carbide core into the soldier's torso. Thassin stood up slowly. His face was very controlled. Very still. He gave an order. The Velori formation shifted, spreading out, creating distance between soldiers, reducing the density of the formation. Standard response to precision fire. They'd trained for it. But here's what they hadn't trained for, the feeling. The knowledge that somewhere behind that barricade, someone had a weapon that could touch them, hurt them. A weapon they'd been told didn't exist. I could see it in the way they moved. The spreading out wasn't just tactical, it was instinctive. The animal part of their brains, the part that predates technology and doctrine and advanced civilization, was doing what animal brains do when they realize they're not the predator. It was making them want to be somewhere else. Calloway fired 4 more times in the next 3 minutes. Riker fired twice, both hits. Song got one, clean. A Velori officer you could tell by the shoulder markings at 550 meters in a crosswind. Hale missed his first shot, made a small adjustment, hit his second. 10 Velori down. 10 soldiers in supposedly impenetrable armor, lying on the frozen gravel of the deadpan while their comrades scrambled for cover that didn't exist on an open plain. Because that was the other thing about the deadpan. The Velori had chosen it as their staging area because it was flat, open, perfect for their standard advance in formation doctrine. But flat and open means no cover. And when you've never needed cover before, when your armor has always been your cover, you don't really know how to find it, how to use the terrain, how to make yourself small. The Velori tried. They dropped to the ground. They huddled behind their transport crawlers. They pressed themselves against the stunted rock formations that dotted the basin. And Calloway kept shooting. I'm going to slow down here because I want you to understand something about what Calloway was doing. It wasn't just marksmanship. Marksmanship was part of it, a big part, obviously. But what she was really doing was something more like psychology. She wasn't trying to kill all 240 Velori soldiers. She knew she couldn't. 120 rounds, even with perfect accuracy, wasn't enough. And accuracy wouldn't be perfect, it never is. What she was doing was choosing her targets. Every shot she took, she was telling the Velori something. She hit the lead soldiers first, the ones at the front of the formation, the aggressive ones, the ones who were visibly urging their comrades forward. Taking them down sent a message. The ones who advance get hit first. Then she shifted to the officers. The ones with the golden shoulder filigree, the ones giving orders. Message: leadership is visible and visibility is death. Then she hit a crawler. One round through the engine housing. The vehicle lurched, smoked, and stopped. Message: your machines aren't safe either. Every shot was a sentence in a conversation the Velori weren't prepared to have. A conversation that said, you are not invulnerable, you are not untouchable. The things you believed about this fight are wrong. And the Velori were listening. The first retreat happened 40 minutes after Calloway's initial shot. The Velori pulled back 300 meters, regrouped. Thassin convened his officers behind the remaining crawlers, and they had what appeared to be a very intense discussion. During the lull, Calloway came down from her position at the barricade. She walked into the command post, set her rifle against the wall, drank an entire bottle of water without stopping, and sat down. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, not enough that you'd notice unless you were looking. I was looking. How many rounds? Voss asked. 18 expended, 14 hits. She wiped her mouth. Reikers at 11 expended 8 hits, Songs at 7 and 6, Hales at 9 and 5. 45 rounds used, 33 hits. And 88 rounds remaining. Voss processed this, they'll adapt. They will, next advance they'll use smoke, electronic countermeasures, possibly shield linking, pairing up to double the kinetic redistribution at the point of contact. She paused. But they have to advance across 800 meters of open ground to reach us. And they have to do it knowing that their armor isn't invincible. That changes the equation. For how long? Calloway looked at him. How long until Centauri responds? Best case 4 more days. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, we'll make it work. I wanted to believe her. I think Voss wanted to believe her too. The Velori adapted. Of course they did. They were an advanced military force, and they had smart officers, and they'd been fighting wars for longer than humanity had been spacefaring. The second advance came 3 hours later. Smoke grenades first, thick gray-blue clouds that rolled across the deadpan and cut visibility to near zero. Then electronic jamming that turned our thermal scopes into static-filled garbage. Calloway had expected both. Winds from the northeast, she said from her position at the barricade. 7 knots. Smoke'll clear the eastern approach in about 4 minutes. She was right. The wind carved channels through the smoke cover, and for brief windows, 30 seconds here, a minute there, sections of the deadpan opened up like curtains being pulled aside. And Calloway was waiting. She dropped 2 more in the first window. Reiker got 1. Song missed. The smoke closed back in before she could get her second round off. But the real damage wasn't the casualties. It was what the smoke was supposed to represent. The Velori had deployed it because they needed cover, cover they'd never needed before, against weapons they'd been told didn't exist. The smoke was an admission, and everyone on both sides understood what it meant. The Velori had started the morning believing they were walking into a surrender. Now they were fighting a war. The second advance stalled at 200 meters from the barricade, close enough to hear individual voices, Velori shouting orders, coordination calls, the hard breathing of soldiers who weren't used to crawling across frozen ground. Close enough that our standard rifles started to matter, not against the armor that still held mostly, but against the gaps, the joints, the seams between plates where the kinetic shield was thinnest. At 200 meters, a good shooter could put a round into the neck joint of a Nexar suit if the target held still long enough. They didn't hold still, mostly, but enough did. And enough rounds found those seams, and the Velori advance ground to a halt in a churned-up mess of smoke and frustration, and the growing, sickening realization that this was not going to be easy. Thassin pulled them back again, this time all the way back to the original staging area. The rest of that first day was a series of probes, small groups, 10 or 15 soldiers testing different approaches, trying to find a vector that Calloway's rifles couldn't cover. She'd anticipated that, too. She'd positioned her shooters to create overlapping fields of fire. The colony sat in a natural depression, ringed on 3 sides by gentle ridgelines. Any approach had to cross open ground, and every stretch of open ground had at least 1 P-71 rifle covering it. By sunset, such as it was, the sky going from gray to darker gray, the Velori had lost 31 soldiers. killed or wounded badly enough to be out of the fight. 31 out of 240. Not a decisive loss in pure numbers. They still had overwhelming superiority. But numbers aren't everything. Numbers aren't even most things. What the Velori had lost that first day was something more important than soldiers. They'd lost certainty. That night, Calloway cleaned her rifle. She sat in the supply depot, the same spot where she'd found the P-71 rounds, with the weapon disassembled on a workbench, cleaning each component with the methodical, almost meditative care of someone performing a ritual. I brought her food, not because it was my job, but because I'd noticed she hadn't eaten since the previous night, and somebody needed to notice things like that. She looked at the tray, protein pack, hydration tab, a dried fruit bar that tasted like sweetened cardboard, and nodded. Thanks, Renner. I sat down across from her. Probably shouldn't have. She didn't seem like someone who wanted company. But I sat down anyway because I had questions, and because the alternative was going back to my office and staring at supply spreadsheets while the world ended. Where did you learn to do this? I asked. She didn't look up from the bolt assembly she was cleaning. Do what? All of it, the ammunition, the rifles, the shield analysis. Where did you learn how to fight Velori? A long pause. The bolt went back together with a series of precise clicks. Garan Station, she said finally. I knew the name. Everyone in Frontier Service knew the name. Garan Station was a research outpost in the Telari system that had been overrun by Velori forces 6 years ago. 64 researchers and support staff. No military presence. The Velori had walked in, declared the station's geological data to be Dominion property, and that was that. No one had fought back. There was nothing to fight back with. I was there, Calloway said. Supply coordinator like you. She picked up the barrel and ran a bore brush through it. They took everything, our data, our samples, 6 years of research, walked in, packed it up, walked out, and we just stood there. The bore brush made a soft scraping sound, back and forth, back and forth. After that, I transferred to Frontier Military, spent 3 years at the Brennan Institute studying Velori armor systems, metallurgy, shield mechanics, ballistic engineering. She held the barrel up to the light and looked through it. Apparently satisfied, she set it down. And then I started building. You planned for this, I said. It wasn't a question. I planned for the possibility. She began reassembling the rifle. Her hands moved with practiced, automatic precision. Velori expansion patterns are predictable if you know what to look for. Resource-rich frontier colonies with minimal military presence. Corvath 7 fit the profile. You requested this assignment. She slotted the barrel into the receiver. I requested a lot of assignments. This is the one they gave me. I watched her finish the reassembly. The rifle came together like a puzzle whose pieces knew where they belonged. Can we hold? I asked. She racked the bolt. The sound was clean and sharp in the quiet depot. Ask me again in 4 days. Day 2 was worse. Thassin had spent the night communicating with his ships in orbit, and whatever they'd discussed had resulted in a change in strategy. The Velori didn't try another ground advance. Instead, they brought up their heavy equipment. 2 siege emplacements, crew-served energy weapons that could fire concentrated plasma beams across the deadpan and hit the colony's perimeter barricades with devastating accuracy. Each shot punched through the industrial-grade alloy like it was aluminum foil, sending showers of molten metal and superheated debris across the defensive positions. The first barrage killed 2 of our soldiers, Private Andrej Malik and Corporal Suna Osai, both at the north barricade, both dead before they could react. 2 more wounded, burns, shrapnel, the kind of injuries that look worse than they are but take people out of the fight just as effectively as the other kind. Calloway took one look at the siege emplacements through her scope and said, I need a different position. She climbed to the roof of the atmospheric processing plant, the tallest structure in the colony, 4 stories of industrial steel and ventilation ducting. From up there, she could see over the smoke and debris and dust, out across the deadpan to where the siege emplacements sat behind a berm of excavated frozen earth. The range was 1,100 meters, beyond the effective range of her modified K-14 by a significant margin. She fired anyway. First round, miss. She watched the impact through her scope. the round striking the frozen gravel 2 meters short of the emplacement. Second round hit. The crew's shield on the left emplacement flickered. The shot hadn't penetrated, too much energy lost over the extended range, but it had made the crew flinch. Third round miss again, long this time over by a meter. Fourth round hit, same emplacement. The shield flickered again, and this time one of the crew members ducked behind the weapon housing. They were scared. At 1,100 meters with a weapon they'd been told was no threat, they were scared. Calloway didn't destroy the siege emplacements. She couldn't from that range, but she harassed them. Every time they tried to fire, a round would crack off the shield or ping off the weapon housing, and the crews would flinch, and their aim would wander, and the shots that had been surgical at first became imprecise, scattered, survivable. She spent 31 rounds doing this over the course of day 2. 31 rounds from a dwindling supply. But the barricades held. Damaged, burned, patched with whatever the colonists could find, but they held. That night, the Velori tried a flanking maneuver. 50 soldiers, moving in the dark, circling south around the colony to hit the less defended processing district where the mineral extraction equipment was housed. Song spotted them. She'd positioned herself on the southern ridgeline, Calloway's idea, anticipating exactly this kind of move, and she had thermal optics that the Velori jammers hadn't been able to fully neutralize. She fired 12 rounds over 20 minutes, hit 8 targets. The flanking force retreated, dragging their wounded. After that, Thassin posted sentries around the entire perimeter of his camp, not facing outward toward any external threat. Facing inward, toward the colony, watching the dark, watching for the flash that meant another shot was coming. 209 Velori soldiers, surrounded by the best armor in the galaxy, hiding behind berms and crawlers and each other. Hiding from 4 rifles. Day 3 was the hardest. Thassin changed tactics again. This time he used his soldiers' greatest advantage, their numbers, and launched simultaneous advances from 3 directions. North, east, and west. 80 soldiers on each approach, spread wide, moving fast, using every scrap of terrain and cover the deadpan offered. Calloway couldn't cover 3 approaches with 4 shooters. She made a choice. She sent Riker and Song to the east barricade, Hale to the west. She took the north herself. If they break through somewhere, they break through, she told Voss. But they won't break through everywhere, and if we hold 2 out of 3 approaches, we can converge on whichever one fails. It was a calculated gamble, and for the first 2 hours of day 3, it almost failed. The western approach was the weakest. Hale was 1 shooter against 80 soldiers. He fired beautifully, 17 rounds, 12 hits, 3 confirmed kills and several disabled, but 80 soldiers is 80 soldiers, and they pushed through. They reached the western barricade, hand-to-hand fighting. Our soldiers against Velori in full armor, fighting with knives and improvised weapons and desperate, terrified fury. I saw Private Elena Vasquez, a 5'3" woman from Guatemala who weighed maybe 120 pounds, tackle a 7-foot Velori soldier at the western barricade and jam a mining drill bit through the gap in his neck armor. I don't know how she knew where the gap was. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she just got lucky. But the Velori went down, and Vasquez was already moving to the next one, bleeding from a gash on her forehead and screaming something in Spanish that I don't think was appropriate for polite company. 3 more of our soldiers died at the western barricade that morning. Corporal James Nkemelu, Private Deho Park, and Private First Class Artem Volkov. Good people, brave people, people who deserved better than a frozen mining colony at the edge of nowhere. But the barricade held, barely and at terrible cost, but it held. The north and east approaches were stopped cold. Calloway and the Riker Song team were too accurate, too disciplined. The Velori couldn't close the distance without losing soldiers, and losing soldiers did something to their formation discipline that no amount of training could fix. By midday, all 3 Velori advances had stalled and pulled back. 46 more Velori casualties. Total now, 77 out of 240, nearly a third. Our losses, 5 dead, 9 wounded. Out of 32, that left 18 combat effective. And 41 rounds remaining. I found Calloway on the roof of the processing plant that afternoon. She was sitting with her legs hanging over the edge, 4 stories up, her rifle across her lap, looking out at the deadpan. She looked tired, Not just physically, although she was that too, with dark smudges under her eyes and a rawness to her skin from the wind. It was a deeper tiredness, the kind that comes from carrying something heavy that nobody else can hold. 41 rounds, she said when I sat down beside her. She didn't look at me. 5 days. Centauri will respond, I said. Maybe, and maybe the Velori intercept the distress call and block the response. And maybe Centauri decides that 32 soldiers and 4,000 miners aren't worth a confrontation with the Dominion. She paused. I've seen it happen before. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. We sat there for a while, watching the Velori camp. Even from this distance, you could sense the change. The camp that had been orderly and precise 2 days ago now had a scattered, nervous quality. Soldiers moving in quick dashes instead of confident strides. Officers clustering in groups, talking urgently. The siege emplacements silent now because the crews refused to operate them without additional shielding. There's something I haven't told Voss, Calloway said after a long silence. I waited. The P-71 rounds. Earth Orbital Command developed them 12 years ago, but they never deployed them, never mass-produced them, never even officially acknowledged they existed. Why not? She finally looked at me. Her eyes were gray-green, I noticed, like the sky on Corvath 7, but warmer. Because the Galactic Council threatened trade sanctions if Earth developed weapons specifically designed to penetrate Velori armor. Something about provocative arms escalation and destabilizing the security balance. So Earth Command quietly shelved the project, destroyed most of the prototypes. The 120 rounds in our supply depot were probably a field test batch that got lost in the logistics system. So these rounds aren't supposed to exist. No. And when the Velori find out what we've been using, there will be consequences, diplomatic ones, possibly serious ones. She ran her fingers along the barrel of her rifle. But that's a problem for politicians. My job is to keep 4,000 people alive until someone shows up to help. Day 4. Thassin requested a parley. He came to the colony gate alone. No escort, no delegation. Just him walking across the deadpan in his gleaming command armor with his hands visible at his sides, and even I had to admit that took a certain kind of courage. Voss met him. Calloway was on the processing plant roof with her scope trained on Thassin's chest. But Voss went out alone because that's what the protocol demanded, and because Voss was a man who followed protocol even when the world was falling apart. I was monitoring from the command post. We'd rigged a directional microphone, so I heard every word. Lieutenant Voss, Thassin said. His voice was different from the first meeting. The easy confidence was gone. In its place was something more careful, more measured. Commander, I have lost 77 soldiers. He said it flatly, without anger, without grief, just a fact. My operation has stalled, my timeline is compromised, and I have been unable to identify the weapon system that is doing this. Voss said nothing. I am authorized to offer terms, Thassin continued. Full withdrawal, return of all Velori personnel to orbit, recognition of Corvath 7's colonial sovereignty. A pause, wind cutting across the deadpan. In exchange for what? Voss asked. The weapon, the ammunition, and the technical specifications for both. I looked at Calloway through the roof cam feed. She was absolutely still, watching through her scope, listening through her earpiece. Negative, Voss said. Thassin's jaw tightened, just slightly. You understand what I'm offering, Lieutenant. Complete withdrawal, no further hostilities, your colony intact, your people unharmed. All I ask is a weapon that, by Galactic Council statute, should not exist. That's above my pay grade, Commander. Then let me speak to your sergeant, the one on the roof, the one who built it. Another pause. Voss glanced up toward the processing plant. The wind blew. Somewhere in the colony a machine was humming. She says no, Voss said. Thassin looked up at the processing plant, at the distant silhouette on the roof. He stood there for a long moment, and I would have given a year's pay to know what was going through his mind. Then he said something that I have never forgotten. She should have been born Velori. He turned and walked back across the deadpan, alone, hands at his sides. Calloway watched him through her scope the entire way. She never put her finger on the trigger. Day 5.